Good evening, each one. It's 7 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started in our Bible study this evening together. We are studying, as you see on the PowerPoint, Parenting God's Way. Parenting God's Way. We're ready to really delve into Lesson 3 tonight. We barely got to introduce it at the end of class a week ago. And so Lesson 3 of Parenting God's Way is focused on learning from some parents we read about in the Bible, in both the Old and New Testament. Predominantly, we'll be looking at the Old Testament, and good examples and bad examples that we can learn from and hopefully help us, and should help us, to make the application to our homes, with our parenting and our children. So we looked at a couple of passages at the end of class last week that I want to remind us of as we get further into our study together this evening. And that is, in particular, when we think about the Old Testament, we know as Christians we're not under the old law. The law of Moses was nailed to the cross. We live under the New Testament. And yet, we have the Old Testament. We have Genesis through Malachi. We have those 39 books in our Bible still. We haven't ripped them out because it's still the Word of God. Those are inspired scriptures, and we still benefit from them greatly. They serve such as a great foundation to us in so many ways, but also in regards to this particular study. As Paul said in Romans chapter 15 and verse 4, for whatever things were written before, were written for our learning, that we through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. And so when we read about these different individuals and families in the Old Testament Scriptures, let's be reminded that they've been preserved for our learning, so that we'll read over that and then we'll benefit from that as God intended us to do. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 6 and 11, and now these things became our examples to the intent that we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. And so when you look at the text of 1 Corinthians 10, particularly verses 1 through 12, 1 through 13, we have the Apostle Paul writing to, obviously, Christians about God's people where? In the Old Testament, Israel. And as they're traveling through the wilderness and heading to the Promised Land, time and time again, they sin against God in various ways and Paul highlights some of those sins. And so we learn from the good, but we're to learn from the bad examples as well from this text. And so these things became our examples, that we shouldn't, lust after evil things as they did. And these things happened to them as examples. He goes on to say in verse 11, they're written for our admonition, our encouragement, our warnings. And then in verse 12, what did Paul say there? Therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed. Look above. Look above verse 12. Take heed lest he also fall. And then it speaks of God's help when we face temptations and testings, right? In verse 13. So I just want to remind us of those verses and certainly how they pertain to what we're focused on in Lesson 3. Abraham's family. In Genesis chapter 18 and verse 19, God said, for I have known him. I have known Abraham. Why, God? Why have you known him? Here's the answer. In order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. We might, when we think of Abraham, we maybe naturally think in our studies together the threefold promise, right? Of land, nation, and seed. The nation of Israel coming through him, the land promise of Canaan, the seed promise of Christ. But God said in this text, this is why I've known him, and it pertains directly to his home, to his family, and what he does in the home, with his children, with his household. So looking at that, considering that, learning from that, what things does God want us to command our children to do? Is it really that much different from what he wanted from Abraham? I would say no. So what does God want? He wants us to teach our children to keep the way of the Lord. Think of Ephesians 6:4. Fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of nurture, instruction of the Lord. Isn't that bringing them up to keep the way of the Lord when we do that? When Proverbs 22 verse 6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, isn't that the way God wants our children to go? To keep his way? It is. And so we want to do that in our home with our sons, with our daughters, instruct them consistently in keeping the way of the Lord, that they would do righteousness. If they do righteousness, what does that mean? You know, John the Apostle, in his first epistle, says if we practice righteousness, we're children of God. If we practice unrighteousness, we're children of the devil. We want our children to practice righteousness, to do righteousness. That's right living, according to God's moral standard, right? And so that, again, takes intentional parenting, as we mentioned earlier. It doesn't just happen. They have to be trained in the way they should go. They have to be brought up in the way they should go, the way of the Lord, but it doesn't just happen that they just grow up and accidentally do righteousness. It's because we've done our job as fathers and mothers in the home in guiding them and teaching them and showing them, as we'll emphasize more in the next lesson with our example, to do righteousness and justice. When you think of justice, what comes to your mind? What's that mean, do justice?
Fairness?
Yeah, I think of fairness. You know, we live in a world of unfairness. We live in a world where lots of times justice is not carried out, and evildoers get off the hook, and it seems like those who are trying to do right are being punished, right? We see that in our own country. But what do we want to teach our children? We want to teach them justice, and to do justice, to be fair with others and their dealings with others. And we can maybe even find some application, I think, at the end that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he's spoken to him. God's got blessings for us and for our children when we keep his way, when we do righteousness, when we do justice in our lives, right? There's blessings, there's rewards. Anything else you would add to this question and this text? Okay. So Isaac and Rebekah's family, there's a lot here, undoubtedly. Genesis chapter 25. Let's turn in our Bibles there, please. And let's read verses 21 through 23. Let me start in the middle row tonight. And you want me to skip over you, Brad, with the baby? Unless Teresa's going to hold up the Bible for you. Avery, are you comfortable with reading, or you want me to skip you? You can? All right. So, Damon, if you'll start off there in Genesis 25, just read a verse, verse 21, and Avery 22, and I'll leave it up to Brad and Teresa, who gets 23, okay?
And Isaac entreated Jehovah for his wife, because she was barren, and Rebekah, his wife, was conceived. Sorry about that. Where'd you read that out? You read 20.
Enoch walked with God after he followed Methuselah 300 years. Genesis 5. Can you explain it again?
The children strangled together with her, and she said, If it is thus, why is it happening to me? So she went in to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in the womb, and the 2 peoples from within you shall be divided, and the one shall be stronger than the other, and the other shall serve the younger.
Teresa said, I'm just moving on. You two are having trouble. I'm just going to take this. I just had a baby, but I'm going to just take this. All right. Well, hopefully everything's all right later with the family. What important thing, though, is stated in these verses? And I think this is kind of the key to really the whole story that comes to follow. Go ahead, Norby.
Both of them, when they had questions or concerns, went to God. And it wasn't that it didn't sound like they consulted each other. He went to God concerning her. And then when she felt something weird, she went to God concerning what she felt that was going on. And both of them, separately, had enough faith to go to God first.
Okay. That's definitely positive. There's a problem, a question we have, go to God. Inquire of Him. Now we inquire, we go to the Scriptures, right? We have all Scriptures that provide us the teaching, the correction, the reproof, the instruction of righteousness that makes us complete, thoroughly equipped for every good work. But that's a positive, as Norm P. points out. They don't understand what's going on here. Seems like there's a struggling here. And so the Lord then reveals His will. God's will is revealed. And what's His will concerning these two boys? You got two sons here, twins, Esau, Jacob. And what did He say about them?
Well, he said that basically father an entire nation, the other would serve that nation.
Okay.
And all that come after him.
Yeah, you got two nations actually in your room. Two people shall be separated. Of course, from Esau would come what people? Edomites, right. And then, of course, Jacob's going to be Israel, the Israelites. But then he says this last statement, verse 23, the older shall serve the younger. Is that typical in the home? No. You got the oldest, and he gets more of the blessings, right? The birthright. But in this case, God said the older is going to serve the younger, and that was God's will. Now, was God's will respected throughout this story? I don't think so. There was so much turmoil in this family, in this home, that they weren't on the same page. They were working against each other. They were going in different directions. If they had just submitted to what they inquired about, to God's will, worked together, things I think they would have gone much differently, right? We get into trouble when, okay, here's God's will revealed. Okay, we know what it says, but then we don't do it. We don't implement it. We don't honor it. We don't follow it in our lives or in our homes, in our parenting. And of course there's going to be problems. Of course there's going to be turmoil. And that's what happened with this family. If you look at verse 28, part of those problems I'm talking about, verse 28, Robert, you want to read that? Robert, can you read that, please?
Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home, but Rebekah loved Jacob.
Okay. So what do we have here? A case of favoritism. One of those things we touched on earlier already in our studies together about what's one of those things that's going to provoke our children to wrath. Pick favorites, right? And both father and mother in this home did that. Esau was Isaac's favorite, but Rebekah preferred Jacob. And we see that unfolding throughout the story that causes more conflict and resentment and even hatred, right? And so favoritism is shown. Comments or questions before I move on? Go ahead.
I was thinking with the favoritism in both the cases of Rebekah and Jacob, and then later with Jacob and Joseph, they're estranged from each other in both of these situations, and their favorite one is, because of their favoritism, in many ways, is separated from them for most of their lives after this happens. And I just think, the repercussions of favoritism, both of these parents, what would they have loved more but to be able to be with their children that they loved, but they couldn't because of the actions that they took, in a way.
Yeah. Good point. If you could hear April's comment, she was also looking ahead to the next question. That's all right. But it's on the same point of favoritism. we see it with Isaac and Rebekah, what they did with Jacob and Esau, and what happened. Because of that favoritism, she wasn't even able to be around him for a long time. He had to be sent away. What happened to Joseph because of favoritism? That's quite a story in and of itself, right? So the repercussions of that, and not just loving all of our children fully, period. Not elevating one above the other. Of course, that's going to cause lots of problems. Jason?
One of the things that we see in regards to the favoritism is the connection between their own personal interests. And so Isaac had an interest in what Esau was doing. So for me personally, I have to be careful. I love sports. I might not have a kid that plays basketball. I might have a kid that goes or is in the band. And I have to treat them just as equally as, and we can tell a kid that, no, we're not playing favorites, but you can show it in the way that you treat them, and so we have to be careful about that, regardless of if the kid is like us or not like us.
Right. Yeah, great point. The connection that the father Isaac felt toward his son Esau because of him being a hunter and eating of his game, and maybe that connection, maybe similar interest, and you got to be careful of that in raising our children, that, yeah, we might relate to one child's interest more than another child's interest, but still not to show favoritism because of that, but to appreciate each one's interest and abilities and gifts they've been given. All right, did someone else's hand go up? I thought I saw another hand. Okay. Maybe someone just moved. Okay. Genesis 26, 34 through 35. Robert Spear.
When Esau was 40 years old, he took his wives Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they were a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah.
Anything we can learn from this with our parenting? Isn't that the worst thing we might fear, right? Children grow up, who they choose as their companion. And they're both a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. Who do you choose? What kind of women? Canaanite women. Canaanite women, God-fearing women? No. Heathens, pagans, right? I mean, there was exceptions, but overall, Canaanite people were ungodly people. Those are who Abraham's descendants are going to drive out of the land of Canaan because of their wickedness and immorality and their false gods that they had. What can we learn from this as parents? Well, we want to be as influential as we possibly can. If we're bringing them up in the way of the Lord, go back to Genesis 18:19, that first question, first passage, and we're teaching them the way of righteousness and justice. If we're doing that, then hopefully their minds and hearts are being trained that they want to seek someone else that's walking in the way of the Lord, that's been brought up that way, or someone that they has been converted, or they're able to bring to Christ that now has that heart as well for and love for the Lord and His will. And we're not told a whole lot about the details of this, but we know Esau's choice. We know we got polygamy as well, and we know the effect, the negative effect that it had on his parents. And Esau later realizes this, by the way. He sees that mom and dad were not happy with his choice when it came to these two women. So if you come to chapter 28, and this is after Isaac sent Jacob away to family to find a wife. Verse 8, and Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan did not please his father Isaac. Maybe Isaac and Rebekah didn't do the best job steering him the right way in that regard, right? So, but we need to do our best. Ultimately, they have free will. They're going to make choices and decisions, but we can't take away our responsibility and the influence, the impact that we can and should have upon our sons and daughters while they're in our care, our home, to point them in the right direction, right? We'll spend a little more time on this later, Lord willing, in this study. Thoughts or comments right now on this point? Norm P.
Isaac got Rebekah because his father, Abraham, sent his servant back home to find her a wife for him. The question is, did that occur to Isaac? Maybe that's what he would be. I mean, he was 40 years old when he took the 2 wives. Not necessarily, I'm trying to remember, given Isaac's age, it was only something that was done because
Isaac was 40.
Isaac was 40 also. Yeah, it was after his mother died, and that's why he sent off to get a wife for him.
Right.
But it's one of those things of, if he was waiting, perhaps too long, to make the decision to seek a wife for his son also, or if it never occurred to him, this is what his dad did because of his grief with his mom.
I'm glad you brought this up. And I think after you said it, probably the rest of us were reminded of it. But I didn't think of it at the time as I was coming up with these questions. But that's such an important point. Back in chapter 24 of Genesis, Abraham goes to great lengths. He's old, well advanced in age, and he said to the oldest servant of his house, who ruled over all that he had, "Please put your hand under my thigh and swear to me. Swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from who? The daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell. But you shall go to my country and to my family and take a wife for my son Isaac." He says, well, what if it doesn't work out? He says, then you're released of the oath that you swore. But of course, God was with him in this. So you think about that contrast with Abraham and what he wanted to ensure and provide for his son a good wife, and not what Esau ended up doing. Abraham did that for Isaac. Isaac evidently did not take those measures for his son Esau. Okay, appreciate that. Anything else? All right. So next we have Genesis 27, verses 1 through 10. We're not going to take the time to read through this. It really continues through the whole chapter, but it has come time for the birthright blessing. And you remember what Esau had done much earlier in the story, right? He despised his birthright. He came in really famished one day, and he smelled his brother's soup, and he said, "Give me some of that." He said, "Okay, sure, brother, if you do what? Give me your birthright. Show me your birthright." He said, "What does this birthright mean to me? I'm about to die here, right? I'm about to perish with hunger." And so the text says, so Esau despised his birthright. Well, it came time for the blessing. And again, let's go back and remember this up here where we began. God's will had been revealed. The older shall serve the younger. But again, Isaac and Rebekah are not working in unison. They're working against each other. They have their favorite sons. And Rebekah finds out what Isaac, her husband, is about to do. And she plans this web of deceit. And she prepares the meat that her husband loves, that Esau was supposed to go out and kill and prepare and bring to his father to receive the blessing. Jacob's like, well, I'm not like my brother, because Esau was what? He's hairy. Jacob was a smooth man. So, okay, we'll help you with that and put some animal skin on you, right? And so when he feels you and smells you, you're going to smell and feel just like your brother. The problem was he didn't what? He didn't sound like his brother, right? The food tasted like it should. He felt like he should. He smelled like Esau. He sure didn't sound like him. But Jacob was able to convince him, yeah, it's me, Esau. And so Jacob receives the blessing. Esau comes in later, finds out what had happened, what his brother did, and Esau was determined to do what? Kill him. My father dies, I'm killing him. And Rebecca knew the danger that her favorite was going to be in, and so she tried to ensure his safety by sending him away to her brother Laban, where, of course, the story continues with Rachel and Leah. But so much turmoil in this family for many reasons. But again, if we just inquire the Lord, find out His will, and then implement that in our lives, in our homes, in our marriages, in our parenting, we'll be blessed for it. But if we don't, we're asking for trouble, and problems will arise. Turmoil will ensue. The fruits of that will show itself. Any other thoughts or comments? Anyone has? Okay. Jacob and his sons. Come to Genesis 37, please. Genesis 37. All right. Ben, how many readers do we have on your row? The men? Okay. So here in Genesis 37, if you'll do 1 and 2, and Jeb, if you'll do 3 and 4, please.
Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father.
Then Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a vari-colored tunic. His brothers saw that his father loved them more than all his brothers, so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms.
All right. So we have another case of what? Favoritism, right? Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children. Ends up having 12 sons from 4 women. The youngest will be Benjamin. But of all his sons, Joseph, his favorite. Why was Joseph his favorite? Who'd he come from? His favorite wife. He loved Rachel the most. So Joseph was born from his favorite wife, Rachel. Makes sense he's going to, in a sense, because of that. And by the way, that caused turmoil, right? That Rachel was his favorite. And there's a lot more we can say about that, but we're going to leave that alone for now. And the reason given here, because he was the son of his old age. And so he showed that love and favoritism with this tunic of many colors. And when his brothers saw, his brothers saw it, it's pretty obvious. It says they hated him. They hated Joseph, could not speak peaceably to him. Later, it didn't help that Joseph started sharing dreams with his family, them bowing down to him, right? And they envied him, and later they looked for an opportunity and found one where they were determined to kill him if it hadn't have been for the oldest, Reuben, who delivered Joseph out of their hands, but then they ended up selling him as a slave to Ishmaelite traders, took him down to Egypt, and of course the story continues there. But again, look at whether it's in the home of Isaac and Rebekah with their favoritism toward Esau and Jacob, or here now Jacob takes it into his home. Is there a lesson there? We can take, and we should take, good things from our upbringing at home into our homes. But if there was something that is negative or ungodly that took place in the home we were raised in, guess what? Don't bring that over in your home. We need to be mature enough spiritually to recognize, mom and dad shouldn't have had their favorites, and I'm determined I'm not going to do that. We're not going to do that with our children, because it's only going to cause heartache and problems and resentment and maybe even hatred with our children towards one another, and maybe in the way they look at us too. So there's a lesson for us, right? How bad things oftentimes carry over from generation to generation, one family to another, until someone with courage and conviction stops that, right? Like Josiah, he stopped that. When you look at Manasseh, his grandfather, 55 years, his father Ammon, wicked, wicked. But what did he do? He broke off from that. We need to break off from anything that's bad, not carry that over into our families. Carry the good over. Learn from the bad. Thoughts or comments? Questions? First, go ahead.
You're just kind of a product of your raising sometimes. Like, you may not even acknowledge or be aware that you do the same things. It's kind of this similar thing of, kids that are raised in violent homes tend to grow up to be, that's not to say they can't break it, but you're a product of your raising, generally.
Yeah, we're a product of our environment, of our raising. And no doubt the home we were brought up in does have a tremendous influence on us in so many different ways. And sometimes we may not see that. We may not recognize that in ourselves. Hopefully, as Christians looking into the perfect law of liberty, we will recognize it, not immediately go away and forget what we saw, but make the changes we need to, be transformed by God's will. But yeah, it can be a great challenge to overcome those things, especially if we don't readily recognize what we have maybe characteristic of us now that was characteristic in the home we were raised in. Shirley?
It comes into every child is different.
That's right.
So you might look like you're showing favoritism. One child might need more than another child because of the strength of the two. So, that's the hard part. Say one has more medical issues or something, so they need more attention than the other one. So it might look like there's favoritism there, and you don't mean it to look like that, but
It's the need.
you have to. Every child's different, so their needs are different, maybe.
Yes. Yes, and so there's a lot that can be said about that, just that statement, and I think we'll develop that more as we go along on this series of lessons. But yeah, every child is different. The example you gave, you might have a child that has medical needs and the other one doesn't so much. And what immediately came to my mind when you said that, I had 2 cousins, and one was born with a very serious heart defect. And he was in and out of hospitals and having surgeries throughout his life, and he passed away at age 33. And then his older brother, I'm sure, he wasn't getting that attention, but he didn't have that situation. But it's not that they loved the younger one more than the older one. It was because of the reality of the situation. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Okay. Appreciate it. Anyone else? All right. So Joshua and his house. We know this passage quite well, I believe. Joshua 24, verse 15. If it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So our question 4, asks, what are some practical ways that parents can lead their children to serve the Lord? What do you think? Go ahead, Dan.
Just being an example, living the way you expect them to live.
That's right.
And then checking to see if they're doing the same thing.
Okay, so being an example, being a good example, right? Which is going to be the 4th lesson. We really focus on that, setting the right example for our children. But I had that as well. One of my answers to this question, parents being a godly example, worshiping God is the number one priority in the home. reading and teaching the Bible to them, protecting them from evil influences. He brings up the gods of the Amorites. I mean, there's going to be plenty of evil influences as we go into the book of Judges, right, that ensnared God's people because they didn't remove those evil influences from the land as God told them to drive them all out. And he says, don't make covenants with them. Don't make treaties with them. Don't intermarry with them. Don't give your sons to their daughters or your daughters to their sons. Well, they began to do that, and what did they do? They began to worship those gods of the Canaanite nations. And so one application is do our best to keep our children as protected as we can in this ungodly world from those evil allurements and influence. You know, it's one thing to say, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. It's another matter to do the things that are necessary in our homes to cause that to happen, right? I mean, I love the statement. It's an inspiring statement. But again, for it to happen practically in our homes, we have to do the things that will make that occur, that this home, this family, others around us and most in this world are not going to choose to serve the Lord, but we have a resolve, the husband and wife, the father and mother, we have a resolve that our house, God is number one. We love Him. We're going to teach our children to love Him and to know His will so that, Lord willing, with all our efforts, they will grow up and they will also determine, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, and generation after generation will make that same decision because of what we did when our children were little and until they left our home. Norm?
The truth of that statement is, it goes back to the first lesson, as a parent, you have to be determined to be that servant. If you aren't doing the things that you should be doing in service to the Lord, how are you going to teach that for the next generation? If you don't know because you're not doing it, how you can't teach that? You can't teach what you don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, there's one thing I disagree with what you said. You said next week's lesson. You know where we're at and what we got left? Hopefully, it'll be the lesson we begin after our meeting with Jerry Jacobs. Hopefully, we'll finish this lesson next week, and we'll start with a new one after our meeting week. But I appreciate your incredible optimism with 2 minutes to go. All right, number 5, if we squeeze it in. Hannah promised God regarding Samuel, I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. Here's the passage. Then she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. Now, I know our situation with our children is completely different in so many ways from what we're talking about here. But at the same time, I think there's a wonderful principle of truth that we can take and use and apply with our parenting. And so I asked the question, what ways can we give our children, so to speak, to the Lord? We certainly don't want to give our children to the world. We don't want to give our children to the devil. There's ways that we can go about and be successful in doing that. So how can we give our children to the Lord? Probably some of the things we mentioned with Joshua 24:15 already. Ken?
Basically the same, like you said, we've been talking about it. Basically to train them and to teach them to love the Lord.
Okay. Train them and teach them to love the Lord with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, right? Wasn't that the first and great commandment for the children of Israel from all the commandments of the law of Moses? Was to teach their children and themselves to love the Lord their God with their entire being. Okay. Anything else you would add? Go ahead, Ben.
Take one word out of that and maybe get a little bit of different thought on it. I will give him to the Lord. And then you could also say, for us to give our children a good life, the way that we want them, I will give him the Lord. Yeah. To teach them, to nurture in them a faith in God that's their own faith, not a faith that's relying upon us as parents, but one that develops in them, and then they can carry that on with them. You will give them the Lord as well.
Okay, well said. I'll express that way. I will give him the Lord. And obviously we do that when we teach them about God, teach them about Christ and the teachings of the Bible. All right, that was our second bell. We'll have to end it there. And next week, Lord willing, we'll pick up with question 6. So bring this question sheet back, and hopefully regular class members have it filled out, please.